Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. One of the more fascinating offseason conversations you can have surrounding this Miami Hurricanes football program going into 2025 is, hey, what does the ceiling look like for the Miami Hurricanes going into 2025? And what I mean by that is, hey, if certain things go the right way during the offseason, going into 2025, how good can this football team be in the 2025 year? That's what I want to get into. Now, you look at this team going into 2025 and look back at 2024 and say, look, the ceiling was really darn high for the Miami Hurricanes in the 2024 year. You saw an offense that, put it quite frankly, and I know we just saw Ohio State's offense really tear it up in the college football playoffs. There's not an offense that I was taking over the Miami Hurricanes the whole regular season. Now, what held this program back was on defense. It was just an absolute disaster, not only from a personnel standpoint, but from a coaching staff standpoint as well. You have to give Mario Cristobal a ton of credit because he looked at what happened in 2024. Changes were made, not only from a personnel standpoint, where you arguably have just a brand new secondary coming into this football team, but just as importantly, brand new coaching staff coming in as well. And then you look at the offense and say, yeah, it might look a little bit different from when Cam Ward was running this offense in 2024. I look at that offensive line. I look at those two running backs you have in the backfield. I look at Carson Beck taking over this offense and say, it's hard for me seeing this Miami Hurricanes offense taking a massive step back from where it was in 2024. It will look different. Might not be as many points per game and yards per game, but it's going to be a very effective offense. Now, what needs to happen for this offense to be not taking that big of a step back? What needs to happen on the defensive side of the football in terms of taking a massive step forward? That's what I want to get into. But you make no mistake about it. You look at this Miami Hurricanes team and say, extremely dangerous college football playoff team if they reach their ceiling in the 2025 year. Now, the more intriguing conversation is what needs to happen. We're going to get into that for the next 10 minutes before we do. And as always, to the Miami Hurricane fans, it's been really fun talking this football team, and it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, right? We saw a lot of highs from this offense. We saw a lot of lows from the defense. I've had a blast talking about it. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas, whether we're talking the recruiting trail, whether we're talking the 2024 year, can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start on the offensive side of the football, and let's start with the most important position. Can Carson Beck get back to the 2023 form we saw from him when he was playing for the Georgia Bulldogs? Because you make no mistake about it, 2023 Carson Beck, that was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. In fact, 6 months ago, if you were to ask me, hey, you can pick any quarterback to go out and win you a national championship, I was banging the table for Carson Beck. Now, I was probably wrong. Probably should have won with Cam Ward, but that kind of tells you how high I was on Carson Beck going into 2024. Now, you look at the 2024 year, he was not bad by any means, but he definitely took a step back. I don't think that was all on Carson Beck. This was a Georgia rushing attack that was outside of the top 80 in terms of yards per carry. Really struggled to run the football. This was a Georgia offense that the pass catchers on the outside led the SEC in drops. It was just a flat-out bad pass catching group around Carson Beck. Carson Beck's coming to Miami, and again, you got to talk about the injury in terms of, hey, he's got to get back healthy physically. But in terms of a fit in this offense, you're going to have an elite run game. This Miami Hurricanes run game in 2024 was elite regardless. I mean, they averaged 5.6 yards per carry. That was number 5 in the country. Nobody talked about it because Miami didn't really lean on the run game because of how good Cam Ward was. This is an offense that's going to be able to run the football in 2025 at a high level. Why is that so big for Carson Beck? Because he is lethal working off play action. You know, one of the biggest problems with what we saw from Carson Beck in 2024, they couldn't run the football. That means they couldn't operate off of play action as well. And you saw Carson Beck probably take a step back in his play because of that, along with just some really bad pass catches on the outside. This is a quarterback that I really like, that I think is walking into a very, very good fit for the Miami Hurricanes. I think the sky's the limit for what Carson Beck can be. Now, can we get that 2023 version of Carson Beck? Because if you do, name me the quarterbacks that you're taking over Carson Beck heading into 2025. Not that many. Number 2, and probably the biggest question mark I have, I think Carson Beck's going to be really good for Miami. The biggest question mark I think a lot of Miami Hurricane fans have is the young pass catcher stepping up. This is an interesting conversation to have because Miami clearly wanted to get some wide receivers in the portal, right? They obviously added CJ Daniels. They made a run at Zachariah Branch. They made a run at Eric Singleton. I think it was very hard for Miami to land a wide receiver in the portal when you didn't really have that answer at quarterback. Now that you have Carson Beck and that spring transfer portal is going to open up quicker than we know it, can Miami go add one more wide receiver? Now, I don't know if Miami even will, because you have the opportunity to go into spring practice and say, all right, what does JoJo Trader look like going into year 2? What does Ray Joseph look like going into year 3? What does Nye Carr look like going into year 2? What does true freshman Malachi Tony look like? There are some potential answers in the wide receiver room, including tight end Elijah Lofton, who I think might lead this team in receiving, maybe not lead this team in receiving yards, but be a focal point with this Miami Hurricanes pass catcher group. There are some answers for Miami, potential answers, I should say, going into spring practice. It gives Mario Cristobal and the staff time to, hey, let's evaluate what we have. If we see good things from JoJo Trader, Nye Carr, Elijah Lofton, Ray Joseph, maybe we don't need to add a wide receiver. But if you do have to, it suddenly becomes a very attractive destination for a high caliber wide receiver that finds themselves in the portal in the spring window to come to Miami. And so not only can the young pass catcher step up, can you go grab one more difference maker for Carson Beck going into 2025? That's really the only question mark you have for this Miami Hurricanes offense. Last thing I want to talk about, can this run game be elite? And can Miami lean on the run game more in 2025? Because you look at Miami last year, how many programs ran the football better? They just didn't run it all that much because Cam Ward was so good. I mean, you're going to lean on Carson Beck a lot. That's the reason you went out to the transfer portal and got him. But the best thing you can do for Carson Beck, when we see Carson Beck play his best football, it's behind a really good run game. I think Miami, with these two running backs in Fletcher and Jordan Lyle, with an offensive line that is big and physical, that can move bodies off the line of scrimmage, if this run game can be elite, this Miami Hurricanes offense is going to be just fine in the 2025 year. Now, we're pretty confident that the offense is going to be very solid, to maybe one of the better units in the ACC. The big question mark is, can you see that 1 year turnaround for this Miami Hurricanes defense? And you look at the depth chart, and this is where it starts for me, is that you look at other defenses that need to do a whole overhaul in one offseason. A lot of times it's because you don't have the personnel. And not only do you have to replace the coaching staff, but you have to replace the personnel as well. I look at Miami outside of the secondary, you look at that front seven. I think this front seven is much better than it was in the 2024 year. And how I should phrase that is, on paper, they were much better than how they played. But I do want to start with the secondary. And the biggest question mark that I have is, hey, we got so many new faces that we are throwing into the secondary room. On paper, it looks really, really good. Right, we got 4 to 5 cornerbacks that we trust. We had Zachariah Poyser, who is the number 2 safety in the transfer portal, coming in, potentially moving Xavier Lucas back to safety as well. We'll see. There are answers from a personnel standpoint. You know, last year that was a glaring question mark, was we don't know if we have the answers from a personnel standpoint. Now we know we have the answers. Now the question mark is, can it all come together? Because we saw Texas A&M kind of do a similar thing in 2024 where they went to the transfer portal, completely overhauled their secondary, and you kind of saw some growing pains in terms of the secondary coming together. The question for me is, do you see those growing pains for Miami? One thing that I find to be really optimistic to think about is how well coached Corey Hetherman had that Minnesota defense in just 1 year of being there. Like, he showed me he can come in for 1 year, really teach his system, teach his guys in the back end, and roll out a really, really well-coached, disciplined unit in the 2024 year. And so seeing Corey Hetherman do that 1 year process at Minnesota makes me confident that he can do that 1 year process with Miami too. And he has the personnel to do it. But does this secondary from a continuity standpoint come together? Because we know the talent's there now. Now it's got to come together on the football field. Second thing that I'm most excited about, you're more athletic at linebacker. Yes, the scheme was really bad from Lance Guidry. And we just saw a lot of confusion, a lot of really, really poor play from an X's and O standpoint. You also saw your linebackers really get picked on. And I think most notably, Francisco Mauigoa. Right, Francisco Mauigoa was awesome in 2023. The question mark you had about him was his athleticism in space. That was a question mark. I think offensive coordinators knew it was a question mark and said, hey, we're going to challenge these linebackers in space. We're going to see if we can get these linebackers on our running backs or tight ends in man coverage. We're going to attack that matchup, and we're going to attack in space too. We're going to try to get to the perimeter and see if these linebackers can go run and chase and play in space. They couldn't. You look at the athleticism in the linebacker room. Yeah, it's a little bit younger. Bobby Pruitt, Adarius Hayes, Wesley Bassing's played a lot, but it's more athletic. And you can cover a lot more ground in this modern era of college football where everything seems to be predicated and operating in space with the football. You got to have athletes at linebacker. Although the experience is not quite there, the athleticism is. And I think that's a really important conversation for Miami. And then lastly, can the defensive line dominate like I see it on paper? You go back to last year on paper, I thought this would be a top 10 defensive line in the country. It was disruptive, but it didn't create a ton of negative plays. And what I mean by that is you look at Miami and say they had 175 quarterback pressures last year. That was more than Ohio State had all year. And they played 3 more games than Miami. I think 4 more games than Miami, or 3, one of the two. But Ohio State sacked the quarterback 11% of the time. Miami only sacked the quarterback 7% of the time. What that tells me is, hey, we're being disruptive. We're getting to the quarterback, but we're not finishing our pass rush. And I'm sure Miami fans probably have, not PTSD, but like we kind of all remember what it looked like against Virginia Tech or what it looked like against Georgia Tech with Kyron Jones or Haynes King getting outside the pocket and punishing Miami outside the pocket with their legs. Look, we're disruptive getting to the quarterback, but we got to turn that disruption into negative plays in the 2025 year. Can you do that? Because I look at it and say, Ruben Bain, we all know what he can do. Akeem Mesidor is coming back, who's been a sneaky, really good football player when he's been healthy for Miami. You bring in David Blay. You have Justin Scott going into year 2. Ahmad Moten was another guy that sneaky played some good football for Miami. I look at it and say, look, if you get some development from guys like Armando Blunt or Booker Pickett or Marquise Lightfoot, this defensive line can be good. I think it's going to be good. Can we create more negative plays in the 2025 year? That's probably what needs to come together. Again, Corey Hetherman bringing in a new defense, you probably should be pretty optimistic about it. You look at this team and say, the offense is going to be dangerous college football playoff team level. The defense on paper can be significantly better than it was in 2024. Now you bring Corey Hetherman. Can that defense come together? Probably the biggest question mark we're going to be talking about. This is a really high ceiling for the Miami Hurricanes. And I guess the last X factor is, can Mario Cristobal put it all together? You've seen him take incremental steps during his time at Miami. It feels like this is the year where there's no more excuses. We got to go make it happen. We'll see if that happens in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.